Hello, I'm Sophie. Welcome to Bibliosophie. I've got some gin in hand. I've got just some gin on ice, which is a simple but delightful drink. This is some Brooklyn gin. It's really nice. I'm in a reading rut, friends, and I'm going to try to fix that this week. So, let's see what we can do.
Bibliosophie.
I'm currently reading sort of 3 novels, and they're just not quite doing it for me. I'm reading I Love You But I've Chosen Darkness by Vaye Watkins, and I'm not latching on. No pun about mothering intended. I started reading The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing, and it's just a very long and ponderous book. And it's definitely up my alley, but right now, that alley is just not working for me. And I don't think it's the kind of book that you can really trudge through if it's not working for you. And kind of similarly, I started, after a long wait, I finally got my hold for Siri Husvet's The Blazing World. And I'm not digging it. So I think I might need to just be reading different books right now. Which also gave me the thought that as part of this video, I could talk to you about the books that I have not finished so far in 2022, and especially the good books, supposedly good books, kind of objectively good books, or good books by other people's standards that just have not worked for me. So the introduction to this vlog is actually going to be my DNFs. There aren't too many. I've had so far a really, really good reading year, January, February, March, April. I've really loved a lot of books. I've read a lot of books, but a few books have just not made the cut for me right now. And books that are good, that I know that I will like and that I do plan to go back to. These are, you have already heard me talk about 2 of them at least once, Ottessa Moshfegh's Homesick for Another World, and McGlue. I tried reading them, I think, the same week, and no, they need to be put aside for now. I may go back to them at some point in the future, not right now. For lack of a less silly word, too unpleasant, too just kind of disgusting and skin-crawling and difficult to deal with for me right now. I don't want it. Kind of along the same lines, I started The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner, and I don't want a book set in a prison right now. It's just not for me. So I set that aside. I don't know if I'll go back to it. Kingdom of Characters, The Language Revolution That Made China Modern by Jing is great. It is about the modernization of written Chinese, specifically Mandarin, the evolution of the simplified Chinese text, and kind of the revolution of trying to get this very, very complicated writing system in a much more globalized world from the end of the 19th century to now, and its various iterations. Extremely fascinating stuff, very well researched, very well written. I've read, I think, maybe a quarter of the book, and mostly this is kind of an incidental DNF. I had it out from the library. I didn't finish it before it was due back. I couldn't renew it. We've all been there. It's one that I'd love to make my way back to at some point in the future. But right now, no plans to. Similarly, Secrets of the Flesh, A Life of Colette by Judith Thurman. This is a very good, long biography of the kind of gamine, novelist, playwright, it girl, of the late 19th century into the 20th century, Colette. I've read about half of it. It's really good, and I just fell off of it, and since I fell off, I think it'll take a little bit to get back on. So I would like to, I recommend it. I haven't finished it yet. Look at Me by Jennifer Egan was something that I picked up in the stacks of the library, just kind of at random, because Jennifer Egan is a good writer. The storyline of this model who gets into a car crash that forces her to have a lot of reconstructive surgery on her face, making her still beautiful, but just kind of a little different. I found intriguing, and I didn't get into it, gave it back to the library. I don't think I'll go back to it. Sip time. Perfectly timed. Another book that I DNF'd earlier this year was Dependency by Tove Ditlevsen. This is the third of the Copenhagen trilogy. I've actually read, I think, about half of it, and it's very, very short. So I could finish it easily. It's great. I will finish it. I just couldn't handle her dependency. I was at the time also in the midst of Empire of Pain by, what's his name? I forgot his name. You know his name. Patrick Radden Keefe. I have my entire list of books of the year so far, so it's very useful, which is about the Sackler family and about the opioid crisis. So Ditlevsen's reliance on painkillers and her dependence on people, it was too heavy for me. Will finish, I don't know when exactly. Another one that was sort of an incidental EDF. I don't know what EDF is supposed to be. Am I combining DNF and EDM? DNF was Speedboat by Renata Adler. Library loan, had to give it back. Plan on finishing it. In fact, more on that very soon. And yeah, that's my list of DNFs, although I have already put The Blazing World in my DNF list, so I think I've more or less decided myself on that one. These are good books. I'll go back to some of them, all of them, conceivably. I know some of you, many of you, have liked and recommended some of them. But, you know, it's like a love story. You need to have the right chemistry with a book. With that in mind, this week, I want to dive into a couple of possibilities. The first I will mention is, in fact, the last I mentioned as a DNF. Guess who bought herself a copy of Speedboat by Renata Adler? I think I'm going to try to read this again, because I got, I think, only 20 pages into it last time, and I'm going to try to read it this week, and maybe even finish it this time around. We'll see. I also picked up from the library Essays 2 by Lydia Davis. Obviously, I'm not going to read all of this, but I find that essays can be kind of a good gateway drug to keep the drug imagery for today's video, because there's less on the line, especially Lydia Davis, who writes really short, stories, but also essays. The essays in her first essay collection are all quite short. So I think it'll be nice to kind of have a buffet of interesting things to read about. I think, now that I'm thinking about it, oh boy, wow, this is accidental, my friends. I think I'm gonna try to read The Trip to Echo Spring by Olivia Laing on writers and drinking. which I bought for myself a little while ago and never read. I love Olivia Laing. I've read almost all of her books at this point. I think this is one of maybe only 2 of her books that I've not read. So I tend to have a very good track record with Laing. Let's see if that will break me out of my current drudgery. And actually, if I can get the loan soon, I would like to maybe start the Premonitions Bureau by Sam Knight. I was reminded of the existence of this book by Hannah at Let's Talk About Books Baby, April wrap-up, where she mentioned this book. Again, she had mentioned it in a previous video, but this is about kind of an investigation, I think, into people's premonitions about things. And I believe specifically a journalist who, for a certain period of time, was interviewing a bunch of people who claimed to have and thought that they had premonitions. So I don't know too many details about it, but twice already it's kind of perked up my little ears. And I've been intrigued by it. So yeah, let's see if any of these stick. I think I'm gonna go back to typing away at my paper now, but maybe tonight before bed I will start, well, probably, unless the Brooklyn Library decides to give me my hold like that, probably one of these. Maybe with a little bit more gin, since apparently this is the inebriation, intoxication vlog, accidentally. Stay tuned. Good evening. I am done with my day. I'm very, very tired because I did not sleep enough last night at all, but that means that I got a big chunk of the way through the trip to Echo Springs. I also actually listened to some of it on audio a bit last night, and especially this afternoon when I took a walk, went outside, delightful things. I don't like it as much on audio. I definitely prefer reading it. I love Laing's writing style and kind of the things that she chooses to write about, and this is no different, but I think I'll definitely like this one less than some of her other books, because it's concentrating so much on kind of manly men and their addictions, so I kind of reach a certain surfeit point where, okay, sure, this is not uninteresting, but I want to hear about more queer weirdos. And women, and which she writes about a lot more in her other books. So yeah, we'll probably finish pretty soon, and I'm definitely going to go to bed soon now. Bye-bye. Ah! No.
They're gorgeous.
You see that we're wearing jumpsuits at least?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you can.
I'm prepared to paint your household.
Yes.
Yes.
Your new household in the south of France.
What kind of novels do I write? Do I write, like, am I just like, novel every 6 months, like
Your
murder
choice,
mysteries?
Carol Oates.
Okay, great.
Wow.
Fantastic.
So it's literary, but it's prolific.
Oh, okay, all right.
I finished the trip to Echo Springs yesterday, and it ended up having more effect on me than I thought it might originally. Laing is kind of recounting the addiction biography, essentially, of great men of American letters like Ernest Hemingway, Tennessee Williams, F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I thought that I wouldn't be so impacted by her kind of recounting of their alcohol abuse, because these are kind of known stories to me, and feel a little bit more distant to my own life and my own concerns. But especially kind of her own personal through line in exploring their biographies did end up making me latch on a lot more. And I was made kind of healthily uncomfortable by pondering things like accountability and blame, self-blame, self-loathing, the necessity of moving on past those kind of very seductive and very negative things. And these are things that I grapple with a lot too. Wow, you're really getting some music from outside. It's pretty great. I have a hard time, like I think a lot of us do, with the concept of moving on, of accountability kind of necessarily also meaning some amount of self-acceptance, the futility of self-loathing. So, I mean, it ended up having more of an impact on me than I kind of gave it credit for being able to do initially. It's still not my favorite of her books. I definitely still prefer Everybody and Lonely City, but, you know, worked well on me. And we have a plot twist. I once again couldn't sleep last night, but because I didn't want to actually read a physical book and instead listen to something, I have now continued to make my way through I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness. So I still am not really connecting with it in some ways. I find a lot of the characters really difficult to deal with, and not even the main character of Claire, i.e. essentially the author. This is very much an auto-fictional story in the vein of, Strangers I Know, that I've been talking about a lot in the past couple of weeks, or Patricia Lockwood's No One Is Talking About This, where the author is definitely recounting their life and then just kind of bifurcating from the reality to fictionalize some aspects where they see fit. So I don't like the subject matter of her life in some ways. I'm very fascinated by some of her writing and some of her questions of academia and motherhood, of course. But I'm also somewhat tired, I think, of the scumbag mother narrative, at the same time as I find it interesting and necessary. So anyway, I remain extremely ambivalent about this book, and I have this feeling that I'm gonna finish it while simultaneously asserting that I'm not finishing it at the same time. Stay tuned, who can say? Yeah, I don't, it's well, despite my griping, I did end up finishing I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness. So obviously it was good enough for me to finish. Didn't love it, didn't hate it, as I mentioned before. Kind of just never really attached to, I think, the subject of it in some ways. funnily enough, just today, Julie, the linen librarian, posted a vlog, or maybe yesterday, posted a vlog of California books she recommends, and she mentions Vaye Watkins in general, and Battleborn in particular, which is a collection of short stories. So obviously, Watkins is a recommendable person. And her writing is good. Head over to that video to kind of get some of her opinions, and as an offset to my lukewarm reception of this book, perhaps. I understand why somebody would like this book. It's an interesting series of thematics where we follow the character Claire postpartum as she struggles to find inspiration and runs away from her family, essentially. We follow her father, who was a member of the Manson family, and also her mother in a series of letters that she writes as a teenager. And her mother ultimately it becomes an addict. So it's a lot of people living kind of on the edge, and that's fascinating for some, difficult for some. It was sort of in between for me. Her descriptions of especially the desert and Reno and life in Las Vegas, I think, are really compelling. But again, you kind of have to want to be in that world. So I don't have extremely good reasons why it didn't work for me. But I think it's kind of as stupid a reason as not wanting to be in that world. And, you know, the book can't do anything about that, really. And then I did end up starting and finishing, just in the past 2 days, I guess, The Premonitions Bureau by Sam Knight. This is essentially an extension of a New Yorker piece he wrote a few years ago. I'll put a link to that also in the description box. And he's following a psychiatrist in mid-century Britain, Dr. Barker, who was really obsessed with premonitions and was trying to do research on premonitions. It's about the fear of death. It's about kind of entropy and the human perception of fate, but it's also a lot about the British mental health system, because Dr. Barker was a psychiatrist. He worked a lot in aversion therapy, and the kind of struggle to modernize asylums, which were, especially at the time, just kind of dumping grounds for problematic people. It's kind of all over the place because it covers so many aspects of the human psyche. So psychology and time, perception of life, perception of death, and then the kind of patterns that we make for ourselves. It is sort of agnostic of the supernatural as a book. I wasn't terribly interested in all of the details of cases that it mentions, so I was reading it quite fast because I didn't really care about so-and-so who had called in to the Premonitions Bureau about such and such a dream that they had had, and then such a, trolley crash happens, etc. The kind of nuts and bolts of it were not that interesting to me, but they could be to you. It's a very fast read. I started it on Friday, didn't read it at all yesterday, and today, Sunday, finished it. So it's fast, it's short. If you're into kind of oddly specific nonfiction, I forgot the term that Hannah uses, niche nonfiction, I think. It's a good example of it. All right, I'm gonna wrap her up. Ciao.